All right, let's go back to Afghanistan here. The situation on the ground in that country continues to deteriorate. So for more on what's going on, I want to bring in now retired Lieutenant General Dick Newton of the U.S. Air Force. General Newton, great to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us. I want to talk about Joe Biden's interview he did with George Stephanopoulos, because U.S. officials are saying that the collapse happened much faster than anticipated, but the president is effectively saying that this is exactly how they expected to happen. Was the chaos inevitable here that we saw on the ground in Kabul?
Well, good morning, Baker. I think the chaos was not inevitable. I think the way the president briefed with George Stephanopoulos on ABC yesterday, and I say that principally because the president had made some policy decisions early on, even a couple months or so ago, that, for instance, the decision to close 7 of our military bases over there, especially Bagram Air Base, which is just north of Kabul, before the withdrawal actually began. And so there were steps that we took that at the president's, he made the decision that ensued, I believe, this really chaotic situation that you see not only at the airport, but along Airport Road and certainly in Kabul, but in the outskirts of Kabul, because there are still, somewhere between 11 to 15,000 Americans there in Afghanistan. And so I believe this is one that, again, could have been avoided. The catastrophe, frankly, could have been avoided with some other policy decisions that the president, other than the policy decisions the president made. So this one's on him in that particular case. Now the challenge is, what do you do with this? We've got 4,500 troops at the Kabul International Airport. Their mission is to obviously keep the airport secure, and also the outside perimeter of the airport, which is miles of defense of the perimeter of the airport, as well as making sure that American citizens have access to the airport to be evacuated. It's a huge haul and a real challenge. And so, I believe that there were certain decisions made early on that we could have avoided this situation to some extent.
So the president is also saying that we'll likely, if we have to, stay past that self-imposed deadline of August the 31st, doing whatever we can to get any American out of the country. Are things that we can do now to prevent the situation from escalating and getting worse here, or basically is it too late at this particular point?
Well, right now you've got General Mark Milley, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, mentioned yesterday at the press conference with Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, mentioned that we do have about 4,500 troops on the ground. There are 2,000 more en route. And so I feel fairly secure right now that the airport is indeed secure. It's under the command of General Frank McKenzie, who's the commander of U.S. Central Command. We've got Rear Admiral Peter Baseley, who is a former SEAL Team 6 leader, by the way, the 2-star admiral in charge of the actual defense of the airport and the operation itself. So we've got the right leadership in place. We certainly have our troops in place from the 82nd Airborne and Marines and so forth. And you've got anywhere between 20 and 24 C-17s now as they pick up the evacuation pace. Are departing Kabul as we speak. Also overhead, you've got Air Force F-16s, B-52s, you've got MQ-9 drones, you've got Navy F-18 attack aircraft. So there is a presence of U.S. air power over the airport itself, which will, I think, give some modicum of security. The challenge is going to be, though, Baker, is really if you've got American citizens outside the airport itself, even in Kabul, but even outside the capital of Kabul, or capital of Afghanistan, Kabul, it's going to be difficult to get them through those checkpoints. I've been on Airport Road, and you mentioned earlier on the top of the broadcast that it is quite a chaotic scene. It's on a day-to-day basis, it can be chaotic, but even more so if you've got Taliban controlling checkpoints and you've got American citizens trying to get access into even Airport Road, but through those checkpoints to actually get in the airport itself is an extraordinary challenge. And so what we need to be prepared for, and I'm sure that's what Peter Baseley and Frank McKenzie and others are thinking about, is to make sure that those checkpoints are secure as well and that we can give access for American citizens. And if I may, it's not just American citizens, it's going to be also Afghans who hold those special immigration visas, about 20,000. Again, that is a huge lift for us to get them secured through the checkpoints and on the airport itself. But first and foremost, the priority is American citizens, American dual citizens also, And it will also be eventually those Afghan civilians who have been by our side for years and who have earned the opportunity for those special immigration visas to leave and to have some modicum of safety and security. And then
I'm glad
to
you
get
mentioned
them out of there as well.
I'm glad you mentioned that airport road, because I've just been reading about it all this morning, and it just sounds so treacherous to get anybody into the airport from that road, just based on what we're hearing on the ground in terms of how tough the Taliban is on that road. Are you concerned about those Afghan allies that have helped us as translators and all that stuff getting into the airport? Because that seems to be an incredibly difficult feat to get them in there.
I'm very concerned about that. I'm also very concerned for American citizens to get there as well. But let's talk about the Afghans. Those civilians who have, again, been by our side either through interpreters or other support they've provided. General Petraeus, has been saying for months, if not the last year or two, that our focus should be on those who have stood by us in this war on terror fight all the way back to 2001. And we should be obligated to them, fervently obligated to them, for their safety and security, not only for them, but their families as well. But it's treacherous. It's day to day, it's a challenge. But even right now, it's treacherous to just, provide them the safe passage and security to get to Airport Road, then much less get through the checkpoints that the Taliban own and secure. And then once they go through those checkpoints is to get them onto the airfield itself for evacuation. It's a huge undertaking. And I believe, again, this self-imposed date of 31 August, I don't think we're going to be anywhere near that. I believe this operation in and of itself will be weeks, if not into maybe September and October. One bit of data or information for you. This is the second largest evacuation in U.S. history that we are undertaking right now. And so this is a extremely heavy lift, pardon the pun, but it's a heavy lift for a lot of our U.S. capabilities. And so this is one that the American people should anticipate. I don't believe it's going to be anywhere near over on 31 August. And as you heard Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin yesterday at the press conference at the Pentagon, says we will not leave any American behind, essentially. And we will wait until we get the last American out of Afghanistan. True enough, but also the civilians, those especially with those special immigration visas, we should be just as obligated towards their safety and security and get them out of there
Absolutely.
as we possibly can.
What do you think the military strategy is going to be with the Taliban once we're officially out of Afghanistan? The Taliban continues to say that they're not the same Taliban that we knew 20 years ago that was harboring organizations like Al-Qaeda and others. They're saying that they want to have more women in the government, all of this. But what do you think the military strategy is going to be once we're out of Afghanistan? Because you don't know really what sort of Taliban you're really getting here.
You don't know. I would. By the way, in my view, there's not going to be a new Taliban. They are still going to be treacherous, radical jihadists. And by the way, this is the most significant win of radical jihad since 9/11. And so this is a significant victory for the Taliban, and they will take every advantage. And you're already starting to see the mis or disinformation campaign from a communication standpoint. There is no new Taliban. This is going to be as treacherous, as evil as you can imagine, point one. Point two, this will also enable them to host, train, employ other terrorist organizations as the jihadist movement now, I believe, will grow and potentially can emanate out of Afghanistan. So you'll see a rise of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and others, not necessarily just in Afghanistan, but throughout the region and throughout the world. And so this is a tremendous challenge for our U.S. national security planners and our strategists as well. As far as the military strategy in Afghanistan right now, the Taliban are in charge and they're going to remain in charge. Our challenge is from a counterterrorism standpoint, not just from a military, but from all instruments of U.S. national power. That would include diplomatic information, financial, and other intelligence and military as well, where we're going to be having to deal with a growing jihadist threat, not only in the region, but around the world. Secondly, and something maybe we can talk about on another call, but the void that's now been filled with the United States. Imagine this. The talking point that the Chinese are now using is, we told you that the U.S. and the Western allies are in decline. And now you see that they are. And by the way, you can't trust them anymore because of this catastrophic exit and withdrawal, and have left really those loyal to us in Afghanistan hanging. And so you'll see China and Russia fill the void, and even Iran. So, and then the extension of China would be Taiwan. And then the extension for Russia will be Ukraine. And then the extension of Iran will be perhaps Iraq, and more threats on Israel. Again, a much deeper discussion for later on. But I just tried to throw that in just a minute or two. But there's a lot happening. And again, this catastrophic withdrawal that's going to impact U.S. national security, not just the military, but all elements of U.S. national security, to make sure that our interests are protected, and especially our American citizens around the world are safe.
Yeah, it's such great perspective. Thank you so much for getting up early and giving us insight on this. This is now retired Lieutenant General Dick Newton of the U.S. Air Force. Sir, thank you so very much for joining us this morning.